The 2018 provincial elections for Wellington Halton Hills presented to you by Acton Up.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the joint Wellington Halton Hills Federation of Agricultural Candidates meetings. My name is Janet Herrick, and I'm the current president of the Wellington Federation of Agriculture, and will be the moderator for tonight. I'd like to start by thanking the candidates for putting their name forward to represent their party and take issues for Wellington and Halton Hills to Toronto on our behalf. The candidates pre-selected earlier in the evening the order for their speaking, for their opening statements. We do have a countdown time bomb that will be displayed on the screen here that will start at 30 seconds down to 0, so you know how much time you have left. Written questions are welcome from the floor. Volunteers will be circulating. If I could just have the volunteers kind of just give a wave there in the green shirts, and Lisa there. So if you do have questions, there's some paper around, and if you have a question, you can kind of wave it up in the air, and they'll come and pick it up. And if there are similar questions, we will combine them for the sake of time. Each candidate will be given the opportunity to answer each of the questions, even if the question's not directed solely at them. They'll be limited to a 1-minute response time. We talk a lot in here about the importance of agriculture in our communities and our economies, and as agribusinesses and businesses within the community, having all candidates meetings with the agriculture business flair is pretty important. We do have a video to start things off from the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, just talking about agriculture in Ontario. So we'll just start with that.
These country roads are going places, not just to the cottage or the local farmer's market. These roads lead to opportunities for the entire province. They lead to the opportunity for more jobs, the opportunity for affordable housing, the opportunity to secure a more sustainable food system. These roads lead to rural communities around the province, and they lead the way to producing prosperity in Ontario. Ontario's rural communities and agri-food sector hold tremendous promise for driving economic growth for the entire province and all Ontarians. By distributing the economic development throughout the province, with infrastructure investment in roads, bridges, schools, broadband, energy, and healthcare, we can create new jobs in thriving communities, ease the strain on big city issues of transportation and housing, and most importantly, we can secure a sustainable food system that every Ontarian depends on. On June 7th, OFA is asking Ontarians to vote for candidates who will spread economic investments around the province to boost the economy for Ontarians in urban and rural areas. A thriving rural economy can spearhead growth for the entire province. Find out more at producingprosperity.ca.
Very good. So the OFA, working with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, have put forward this Ontario Prosperity format for the election. We do have a pledge for each of the candidates that are in front of them, agreeing with the pledge form and the concept of producing prosperity from an agricultural perspective. And we will ask each of them to sign that. At the end, there'll be a photo opportunity to be with each of you for signing the document. So we will get started. As I said, people did pick numbers before, and people are up on stage in just an alphabetical order, no particular order. The first for opening statements is Ted Arnott.
Well, thank you, Janet. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here and great to see all of you as we focus on agriculture, arguably Ontario's most important industry. I want to begin by thanking the Wellington Federation of Agriculture and the Halton Federation of Agriculture for jointly organizing and hosting our meeting tonight. Tonight's proceedings are also supported by the Centre Wellington Chamber of Commerce, and I want to thank them too. This year, the Ontario Federation of Agriculture observes its 82nd year as the province's strong voice for agriculture and agribusiness. We can take pride in that rich history and the part that our ancestors played in building the greatest country in the world and sustaining its people. I'm guessing that all of us here, even if we aren't farmers or directly engaged in agribusiness, will have family members who farmed. My grandfather, John Hawkins, farmed all his working life up in Arthur Township. He had a mixed farm of the type that was common in those times, and he retired to town the year that I was born. Our Grandpa Hawkins, as we called him, lived just up the street from our house when I was growing up. He was a kind, unassuming man, very active in our church, and had a quiet dignity that made him a very respected member of our community until he passed away in 1982. I say all of this not just because I admired my grandfather, but also because the good qualities I remember in him are the same ones I see every time I meet with farmers or the representatives of farm organizations. An understanding that family is the essential building block of community, a dedication to hard work and getting the job done, the resilience to find a way through the tough times, honesty in dealing with neighbors, partners, and suppliers, and an optimistic hope that no matter what the challenge, things will get better. In our province, and right here in the county of Wellington and the region of Halton, we have some of the best farmers in the whole world, the smartest, the most innovative, the most productive, and the most visionary. We can take pride in that too, pride that our efforts provide nourishment for a local market, but also for a nation, a continent, and increasingly, a hungry world. In partnership with all orders of government, it is your professionalism, reinforced by that well-deserved pride, giving you the confidence to plan and overcome adversity, no matter what its origin, be it bad weather, depressed markets, uncertainty because of trade talks, rising input costs, excessive red tape, sky-high hydro rates, or an urban-dominated government indifferent to the importance of agriculture. Our vast improvements in productivity over the past century or so have meant more food is produced, but there are also fewer farmers. We fear that our clout with government is diminishing over time. However, at the same time, agriculture and agri-food continue to be dominant segments of the economy, together contributing $13.7 billion to Ontario's gross domestic product, generating $1.4 billion in provincial tax revenue, and employing 158,000 people, paying $8.1 billion in wages and salaries. We need to make sure that more people in the city understand all that. During my almost 28 years in the Ontario legislature, it has always been my firm belief that one of the most important responsibilities of any MPP from rural Ontario is to be prepared to go to bat at Queen's Park for our farm families. Together, we have always supported the three pillars of supply management, better risk management safety net programs, sensible environmental protection, innovative research, and the practical application of those discoveries into farming methods. Let us move forward together, no matter what the outcome on June 7th, striving to speak with one voice, articulating a vision of the future for our industry that allows you not only to survive, but to thrive, prosper, and pass the torch to the next generation. I look forward to your questions, and I thank you very much.
Second will be John Hurst from the Liberal Party.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Wellington and Halton Federations of Agriculture for again hosting this important meeting. I know members of the Christian farmers are also here tonight to ensure that agricultural issues are addressed in this campaign. I am pleased to be here this evening as the Liberal candidate for Wellington Halton Hills. I was born and raised in Acton. I am widowed, having lost the love of my life, my wife Maxine, to cancer. In 2003, searching for a new purpose, I ran for Halton Hills Council, where I continue to this day, although I am on a leave of absence for this campaign. For many years, I've served on the Halton Health Care Board, overseeing our local hospitals. Fundraising for cancer has always been something of a passion. Let's just say I wear a lot of Terry Fox t-shirts. Being a retired electrician, and I have another retired electrician friend in the audience, Gord Thompson, I'm somewhat comfortable around building projects. I have also offered my time for Habitat for Humanity and local heritage projects. I like service and projects that make our community even better and that bring out the best in people. And I guess that's the core of why I am a Liberal seeking your support in the upcoming provincial election. I know some people are thinking, why would I run against Ted Arnott? I know and respect him, having worked with him on municipal issues. But here's the thing. I am not running against Mr. Arnott. I am running against the policies of Doug Ford, who Mr. Arnott's Conservative Party chose as their leader. I believe these policies will negatively affect people's lives here in Wellington. Because you see, Doug Ford cannot be trusted to preserve programs which are important to people in our rural, town, and country riding. Doug Ford cannot be trusted to protect the Greenbelt, agriculture, or other protected public lands. He said that big chunks of the Greenbelt were just farmers' fields and should be developed. With that comment, it is obvious he has no understanding or appreciation for agriculture in this province. He may be good at manufacturing labels in Toronto, but he sure knows little about milking cows in Wellington County. If his secret deal with developers hadn't been exposed, does anyone believe he would have backed off? It makes you wonder what other promises have been made in private, to whom, and in exchange for what. It also makes you wonder whether a Conservative government would consider support to farmers and agricultural systems as priorities. Well, Doug Ford's platform consists of a new idea every day, so it's anybody's guess. So what, you may ask, has the Liberal government done for us? Well, I think we have accomplished much more than many are actually aware of. The Greenbelt, places to grow, and agricultural system policies, all initiated by the Liberal government, have created a solid, predictable framework for agriculture to prosper in Ontario. Investments have been made in local and provincial transportation systems to get products to market. In our community, for example, rural infrastructure has been upgraded, with Centre Wellington receiving over $500,000 for bridge replacement, and Erin is receiving $1 million for reconstruction of the Hillsburg Dam Bridge. Recognizing that small municipalities are unable to handle major infrastructure projects on their own, the Liberal government has tripled the Community Infrastructure Fund from $100 to $300 million. Water stewardship has been a major focus as well. Thanks for the Liberal policy for free and reduced tuition for all.
Thank you, John. That's 4 minutes.
Thank you. Let me and the Liberal Party continue our work in Ontario and Wellington Halton Hills. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Green representative seems to be MIA. Maybe he can't find his school. I'm not sure. He's on his way. Okay. We will move to Diane then. Diane Valentine from the New Democrat Party.
Sego. Hello. I would like to start by acknowledging the Indigenous people, the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, on whose traditional territory we are currently gathered. And I ask that we commit ourselves to the ongoing process of reconciliation and learning about our shared histories. Miigwech. Thank you. At election time, people tend to think in colors. Many will always vote blue, others will always vote red. Often it's because they learned to do so, or it's what they've always done. This sort of polarization is what our neighbors to the south grapple with, as there really is no other choice. But here in our beautiful province and our community, we're fortunate that there are more than two colors that truly represent everyone in our democracy. And one of those colors has been orange for a very long time. Tommy Douglas, voted to be our greatest Canadian not long ago, was able to bring universal health care to our nation. His vision of a better Canada for everyone created universal health care, now a deeply held Canadian value. And that vision, that promise for a better, fairer nation for all needs to be sustained and maintained, not battered, underfunded, or dismantled by short-sightedness and greed. The color orange is said to represent joy, success, and engagement. And these are and have always been the values upheld by the New Democratic Party. Who doesn't want our province, our parents, and our children to experience joy, success, and engagement? We all do. The question is what the vision of the government of the day does to make these things happen for everyone. The Ontario Liberal government, for the past 15 years, has violated charter labor rights, chronically mismanaged the funding and direction of education, allowed hallway medicine to balloon, has continued to allow 1 billion liters and counting of our water to be bottled in plastic for pennies on expired permits, and sold off half of one of the greatest publicly owned utilities ever created, which is now resulting in skyrocketing hydro costs, and the board just gave themselves a raise. This is the Ontario that 15 years of Liberal governance has created. Enough is enough. My name is Diane Ballantyne, and I'm running for the NDP because I will not stand by as Kathleen Wynne's party promises to deliver the moon, but only at election time. They've had 15 years to deliver on what are clearly blatant campaign promises. If they had really wanted to deliver on these, they would have done so by now. It is clear we cannot trust the Ontario Liberals. But there's no reason why anyone should trust the current Progressive Conservatives or Doug Ford either, a leader of a party plagued by its own inner turmoil, power struggles, and extremists. This party is promising, while defying both logic and basic math, massive tax cuts and increases in services. If the PCs cannot manage their own party or bother to produce a costed platform for the voters, why would anyone trust them to manage our province? The Ontario NDP, however, does have a plan, a fully costed and vetted plan. It is a plan for change, a plan for the better. In this election, we're offering a clear message of hope, of inspiration, and of change. In this election, we don't have to keep switching from red to blue or choosing between bad and worse. We do not have to keep on settling. In this election, we have a real choice. The NDP represents the changes we all want to see in this province.
That's 4 minutes.
Thank you.
We did have some questions that were sent to us ahead of time, as well as the questions that are being collated. So I'm gonna start with one of those, and we will move across the stage, starting with Ted, and we will change up the order on the next question. So in your riding, farms, businesses, and communities are struggling to stay competitive and sustainable because of reliable internet not widely available, infrastructure not up to par, property taxes rising, labor hard to find, schools are closing, opportunities for youth to remain in the community are dwindling. How does your party plan on fixing these problems to make agriculture more competitive?
Before I answer that question, I guess this is a point of order. Would we allow Dave to make his opening statement now that he's arrived, before we get into the question?
If the three of you are agreeable? Yes? Okay, then we will do that.
Thank you. Hi, I apologize. I went to 5757 fifth line Rockwood and found there wasn't anything there. I was already vaguely panicking, and then it went into full panic mode. Okay, good evening, and thanks to Janet and the Wellington Halton Federations of Agriculture for organizing, and all the candidates and you, the audience, for coming here tonight. I'm Dave Rogers, and and I'm standing as a Green Party candidate in our riding to offer you the choice to vote outside the three-ring political circus. I'm also here to listen to your concerns and to discuss with you the issues that are important to us all. Our platform is based upon the themes of jobs, people, and planet, and offers realistic solutions, approaches to real issues. In reviewing the links that came with the OFA's invitation, I was impressed by the OFA's statement that the agri-food sector contributes $13.7 billion to Ontario's GDP, that the farm sector generates $1.4 billion in tax revenues, and 158,000 jobs, which produce $8.1 billion in wages and salaries. It is clear that agriculture is and should remain a leading economic sector of the province. On the business side, I quote our leader, Mike Schreiner. Fiscal responsibility is not about austerity. It's about raising revenue to invest in public services, saving money responsibly, and having a plan to get back balance in good times. We are all concerned with the cost of hydro rates, and our party proposes to tackle the problem head on. Ontario can save over $1 billion a year by closing the Pickering nuclear station as scheduled in 2018. This high-cost nuclear power can be replaced with low-cost hydropower from Quebec. And again, the savings is $1.1 billion per year, which can be invested in a green building and business program, which will lead to further savings, both fiscal and energy-wise. The Green Party seeks to change the focus of our health services to that of preventing illness rather than treatment after the fact. We also propose giving our healthcare a boost by including the funding of mental health in Ontario OHIP Plus. In any given year, 1 in 5 people in Canada will personally experience mental illness, a mental problem, or illness. Access to counseling and other support services should be available to all Ontarians, regardless of ability to play or where you live. In the run-up to this election, it was apparent that there are many critical environmental issues in Wellington, Halton Hills, which our elected officials are not addressing. I was with you at Waterstock, the Concerned Residents Coalition Hidden Quarry events, and that May 9th council meeting in Martin. Your Green MPPs will introduce legislation to permanently protect Ontario's prime farmland and source water regions. We will manage water as a public trust and prioritize public drinking for communities and people. We are already on the green path. Wellington County's Green Legacy Tree Program has been recognized by the United Nations. As your MPP, I will work hard to make Wellington, Halton Hills, and Ontario a better place for us all. Vote for what you hope, rather than against what you fear. Vote green. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I'll restate the first question. So the first question, in your writing, businesses and communities are struggling to stay competitive and sustainable because of reliable internet not widely available, infrastructure not up to par, property taxes rising, labor hard to find, rural schools are closing, and opportunities for youth to remain in the community are dwindling. How does your party plan on fixing these problems to make agriculture more competitive? And we will start with Ted and come across to Dave.
Well, thank you very much, Jan. It's a good question. We do well to adopt the Ontario Federation of Agriculture's Producing Prosperity in Ontario agenda to start off the first day in the legislature, as well as the Barton Report, which was recommended to me some time ago, also known as the Advisory Council on Economic Growth. Had some terrific ideas as to how we can improve productivity and competitiveness in the agriculture sector. Actually, the very first day after I was re-elected to the legislature in 2014, the Friday, I went into my riding office and we composed a letter to the Premier-elect, and we raised 3 issues, and one of them was the need to improve high-speed internet in rural communities. And I followed that up with a resolution which I tabled in the legislature as soon as the House resumed sitting. We actually sat in July of that year, and I followed up and continued to raise it. About 2 years later, we were pleased that the government actually did respond to what we were working actually with the Western Wardens group, and we were pleased that the government responded, but obviously more needs to be done in that respect.
Thank you, Ted. I'm sorry, a minute is very, very quick. Thank you. Diane?
The NDP has a fully costed and published plan that you can look up. What we have committed to do is invest over 10 years, $1 billion in broadband internet service to rural and northern Ontarians. We are committed to stop and reverse the cuts and the closures to rural schools and hospitals, and to end the unfair rural hydro delivery costs and reduce the rates by 30%. These are not tweets and platitudes. This is a fully costed platform and plan that you can read the details about online. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, John. Yeah.
Thank you. Ontario's agri-food sector is recognized by the Liberal Party as an economic powerhouse that generates more than $37 billion to our economy and supports over 800,000 jobs across the province. We have invested more than $190 million since 2003 in initiatives and projects that help promote and celebrate local food, including our Foodland Ontario program. Ontario farmers who produce edible horticulture will have access to $60 million in support over 2 years through the edible horticulture program. We know that infrastructure is also important, and that's why we have made the bold move to run a small deficit so that we can address the issues of infrastructure needs. The government has invested $530 million since 2007 to upgrade broadband infrastructure, and the plan is to invest an initial $500 million in digital infrastructure as part of the 2018 budget.
That's 1 minute. Thank you. Dave?
This one on? Okay, there, I'm back. With respect to broadband, the Green Party we regard this as bringing business into the 21st century. It's essential. And that's it. It has to be done. Infrastructure. I think we really want to look into increasing rural public transport buses and eventually possibly ride sharing. One of the problems of getting around this province is if you have a daughter and taking them in St. Catharines, there's no bus from Guelph, and I'm sure it's even harder from here. Rural roads and bridges, which have deteriorated since the downloading, which was not reversed by the change in government. In taking his eggs from Pushlands to Blue Haven Farm, my campaign manager, Jerry, has to drive a 3-legged corner because the bridge is out. That won't be out repaired for 3 or 4 years. This is unacceptable. Natural gas, I think we really have to, the farmers will need natural gas as a short term over the next few years.
Thank you, Dave. Move on to question number 2, and we will have Diane answer this question first. Funding formulas tend to favor urban areas. The higher costs of delivering equivalent services in the rural areas are not fully considered nor funded, and a variety of programs such as public transit, support for universities, and funding for major cultural facilities are often only provided in the urban areas. The result is a policy system that too often inherently advantages urban areas and that can contribute to slower economic growth in rural regions. How does your party plan on bringing the rural voice to caucus and supporting rural Ontario?
Okay, that was a big question. Okay, so the policy of the NDP is to put people at the center of every decision. to think about how families are going to be affected. We understand that the main funding source for small and rural municipalities through the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund has been cut by $120 million a year for the past 10 years. We also understand that the rural delivery charges for hydro, as I mentioned earlier, are exceptionally high. We will get rid of those. That is a commitment in our platform. We also understand that the funding for the agricultural drainage infrastructure program has stagnated at $7 million a year despite the threats of floods from climate change. So the NDP understands that working with farmers is not a one-size-fits-all approach, that there are a variety of different needs, both with established long-time family farms, long or large corporate operations, as well as supporting young, new farmers to be able to enter into the business. The NDP has those things in their costed platform.
Thank you, Diane. John?
I think we here in this riding can understand the concerns regarding services for the rural area versus services for urban areas, because this riding is made up of both of those. We've had the town of Halton Hills, which is probably with Georgetown being the largest urban center. And then we have all of our rural areas, our hamlets, our settlements and that sort of thing that are spread throughout the riding. So it is a difficult situation it's not, I shouldn't say difficult, it has to be recognized that it's a difficult riding to service because of the diversity throughout the riding. But the Liberal government has shown its commitment to farmland preservation with several policies that we believe show the commitment to the farming community, letting them know that we're there for them. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Dave?
The Green Party has promised to protect prime farming. With this protection, hopefully, farmland prices will stabilize because it will no longer be open to speculation, as certain leaders of the province wanted to do with the Greenbelt. With stable farm prices, land prices, that will give it a big boost to stabilizing farming income. The critical thing, I think, is that figuring out ways to attract and keep young people. A lot of the young people I see going into farming are following their organic route and it gives you higher values. They are working small acreages and for crops that they sell at farmers markets, and they're at least getting by and expanding in some cases. And I think we have to look at both the large farms and small farms, and as others have said, one size does not fit all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Ted?
Well, the question, I think, was, do the provincial government policies and funding formulas disproportionately benefit the rural areas or the urban areas? And I would suggest that the rural areas of the province have been received short shrift in the last 15 years by the Liberal government, have not been fairly treated in terms of the allocation of provincial dollars. One of my most important relationships in my riding is with our municipal councils, and I advocate for them when they bring issues to my attention and do whatever I can to help. And we've seen over the years a diminution of the provincial support programs to municipalities. We fought to reinstate the Connecting Link program, and I was pleased when the government finally admitted that it had made a mistake in scrapping it. But going forward, there will continue to be infrastructure needs in our rural municipalities, and if I'm re-elected, of course, that would continue to be a high priority for me to fight for those available infrastructure dollars to ensure that our projects are funded by the provincial government as funding partners.
Thank you. Question number 3. Do you support high-speed rail line through Ontario? It will be coming through your riding. If you do, how will you consult with rural Ontario to address the major concerns that it has raised? If you do, what credible information do you have that would support this high-speed rail line through your riding? And I'll start with John.
So you're talking high-speed rail line,
Yes.
and I'm assuming, are you talking GO Transit through the riding, or are you talking about? I'm questioning whether you're referring to two-way all-day GO service.
No, the new proposed high-speed rail that is proposed to come through
Okay.
from all the way from down to Windsor, all the way through to Toronto.
Actually,
Yeah.
okay, that's great. Actually, I knew that sitting up here, having not having been at this for much more than 3.5 weeks, that I was going to probably get caught with a question that I couldn't answer and will not answer, because it is an issue that I am not aware of, and it is an issue that I will be aware of, and if anyone wants to question me after in a day or two, I will have an answer for you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Dave?
I believe the issue, sorry, can you hear me? I believe the issue with high-speed rail is the Windsor-Sarnia, or the Toronto to Windsor-Sarnia corridor. And the issue with farms is that the highest level of high-speed rail requires elevated tracks, which will go through farms and can essentially isolate parts of the farm. I also understand that if you go to one lower down, one level slower in high-speed rail, it can use the existing tracks. And that would be, at least initially, the approach I would favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Ted?
Yeah, just before the 2014 provincial election, the Liberal government committed to studying the idea of high-speed rail between London and Toronto. And I think it was announced by Deb Matthews, who at the time was a senior minister in the Liberal government. She's not seeking re-election, but I think it was actually a political promise to try to benefit her and her riding in London. I also think that this proposal will never be built in our lifetime. It would be an astronomical cost. I think the cost-benefit analysis that might be undertaken would prove that the tens of millions of dollars that would be spent to build this new system could be better spent on other urgent rural agriculture as well as infrastructure needs. So I have a lot of questions about it, and I think the farm organizations that are speaking out against it deserve to be listened to, and we need to have some answers. But I'm quite skeptical about it, and I'm highly doubtful that it will ever be built.
Thank you, Ted. Diane?
The NDP, as I mentioned, has a history of consultation and listening to citizens' concerns. With regard to the high-speed rail line, reducing our carbon footprint is essential. Mass transit is something that helps to do that. But of course, with the potential impact on farming land, there would need to be consultations and collaboration. As far as how to pay for mass transit, whether it would be this high-speed rail line or improved GO services, we use the premiums from our cap and trade plan, the revenue from that to invest into public transportation.
Thank you. Question number 4. Do you support a greenbelt expansion in the inner ring? If so, why? If not, why? And we will start with Dave.
Yes, I and the Greenbelt, I and the Green Party support the expansion of the Greenbelt. However, we recognize that there are problems with expansion of the Greenbelt. And one of them, in talking to Cushland's Councillor Matthew Bulmer, some of these problems that caused Cushland's Council not to recommend it were that small agribusinesses can't build a secondary dwelling for a family to work on or help to work on the farm. Another had to do with the fact that when going to the Greenbelt, land will go from 5 classes to all class 1, which can distort market prices again. These are rubs that I think the Greenbelt has to address, but they are solvable. And the purpose of the Greenbelt is protecting land and water should be maintained. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Ted?
Well, this came up earlier in one of the opening statements by one of the candidates, and I want to state unequivocally that Doug Ford has stated as well that he's not going to change the Greenbelt from its current boundaries. Before taking a position on the question of the expansion of the Greenbelt, I reached out to some of our municipal partners and sought their advice because, of course, municipal governments should have a big say in land use decisions in their own communities in consultation with their local residents. And the position of many of the municipal councillors in our riding was that, in fact, there are already many layers of protection for greenbelt area lands, and to expand it at this time didn't seem to make too much sense. So I would not be in favor of expanding it at this time. I think the Liberal government has made an announcement to expand it for political reasons just before the election, but my position is to leave it as is.
Thank you, Ted. Diane?
The NDP's position is to strengthen the greenbelt by protecting the prime farmland from land speculators and to expand the economic opportunities for families and local producers. They do not have a plan to expand the greenbelt at this time, but to strengthen and protect what is currently there.
Thank you. John?
There has been a mixed reaction to the Liberal government's commitment to growing the greenbelt, considering and consulting about where that growth should occur. A lot of people have suggested that growing the greenbelt doesn't go far enough, while others are arguing that expanding the greenbelt is too restrictive, both for growth and agriculture. So, unequivocally speaking, it's difficult to understand how a person can come out and advocate for opening up big chunks of the greenbelt, and then obviously from hearing messages from his MPPs do a 180. As I mentioned earlier, he really shows that he doesn't have a handle on what the greenbelt does, where it's connecting all of your environmentally sensitive areas, your farmlands and your forests. Thank you.
Next question, and we will have Ted start by answering this question. And it actually has a bit of a thread from the previous question. Do you support MPAC assessment valuations determined by rental rate per acre instead of comparison farm sales? Do you think the land rental rates are more tied to productivity potential? And do you think MPAC has adequately addressed the greenbelt valuation and speculation?
Well, I've had discussion with farmers about this very issue, and I think that MPAC, of course, Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, to explain what the terminology means, has an important responsibility to fairly and honestly assess the values of property. There should be an appeal mechanism, and there is, to allow landowners who feel that they've been assessed improperly. I think that probably needs to be streamlined and made easier for people from what I hear. But at the same time, there is an appeal mechanism that people can exercise their rights to appeal. But the methodology is something that needs to be carefully reviewed from time to time and studied. And I know that there's an issue in terms of farm-to-farm sales, and that's come up before. And I also think that all of what you said needs to be reviewed carefully. But it is a very complex issue, and I would need to study it further before making a definitive statement, other than I believe that the system needs to be reviewed from time to time to ensure that it is fair for all farms and all farmers.
Thank you. Diane?
I don't know how to answer that question, I'm afraid. That is a deep policy question, and I am not going to take up the minute trying to come up with an answer for that, but I would be happy to find it out for you if you would like to contact me for a full and detailed answer on the NDP's position on that question. Thanks.
Thank you. John?
Could you just do me a favor and repeat that question?
Do you support MPAC assessment valuation determination by rental rate per acre instead of comparable farm sales? That's the main crux of the question.
Yeah. So MPAC, I've had some personal experience with them having to appeal my property down just south of Acton. I actually live in a swamp, so I have 17 acres, 16 of which is what you would call a low-lying area with a high water table, and the rest is about 1 acre with my house on it. And I know that farmers, as farmers, you are assessed as your homes in 1 acre are assessed as at the home rate, and then the rest is at a farm rate. I would support any system that would support you having the least amount of income or of property tax to pay for your farmland as it's being used for farmland. And I suggest to you also, if you have any question at all about what your assessment is, appeal it.
Thank you, John. Dave?
I'll mostly pass on this again because I'm a shallow person swimming in deep water with this question.
Thank you for your honesty.
I do want to say, though, that I think that all land, if what I got from Councillor Bowler is true about the expansion of the green belt, reducing the lumping of class 1 to 5 farmland as all one, that shouldn't be done. There are differences in farmland. Some of what is called some of the farmland in bushlands mostly pushes up rocks, which we call bushlands potatoes.
The next question, and we will have Diane start. With the area in and around the Golden Horseshoe, which includes this area being designated for greater growth and mapping of agricultural and natural heritage systems, created a limit where growth occurs. What do you see as 1 plus and 1 minus to this plan? And we'll talk about the expansion of the Golden Horseshoe as well as mainly the agricultural and natural heritage system mapping.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to repeat that question, please.
With the area in and around the Golden Horseshoe, which includes this area being designated for greater growth and mapping of agricultural and natural heritage systems, created to limit where the growth occurs, what do you see as 1 plus and 1 minus to this plan?
Okay, so the idea of having increased growth is important for us, as with the provincial legislation of the Places to Grow Act, which is directing growth. There is some positive aspects to that, so that we don't end up with massive urban sprawl, because that's not a good use of our land. So it's important to have some direction for the kind of density of growth that we're going to have. So that's positive. But a negative piece about that kind of directed growth, as I was just speaking with somebody earlier, is about having the province determine. I live in Fergus, and we've been told that we're supposed to almost double in our population in the next 15 years. We don't have the infrastructure to support that kind of growth. So there needs to be a balance struck between making sure we don't contribute to urban sprawl, but that we use smart growth to ensure that that density makes sense, and where the province is demanding that it happens, that they are supporting the infrastructure for that growth to happen.
Great, thank you, Diane. John?
I think the Liberal government has delineated fairly well the areas of growth that are going to be looked at not only up to 2031 but to 2041 as well. I know that my Ferguson and Laura friends have told me that the expectation is that the development will actually double the size of Allure and Fergus, and I think that's one of the things that the Liberal government is trying to do, is trying to make sure that any future development is done not only within urban boundaries by intensification, but also it's being done in areas that are close to existing services, your water, your sewer, and your hydro, so that you're not out into areas and required to put in that type of infrastructure. And I think that also affects, having to put in that infrastructure,
Thank you, John.
affects the cost of the housing.
Dave?
Hi. I'm going to start out by talking about the natural history.
Natural heritage systems.
Okay, because my wife does that sort of stuff, and really what you want to do is look at natural systems, which are declining in Ontario, and they have to be mapped and maintained. Similarly with agricultural land, and so I'm in favor of having this mapping done. The concept of limiting municipalities and forcing them to intensify their density within their boundaries is sensible, and it should be continued. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted?
Well, I suppose one plus would be that apparently natural heritage systems might be preserved. But one negative, of course, is that landowners probably face greater additional restrictions on the use of their land. And we have to decide which does the plus outweigh the minus. We've seen in the last 15 years of Liberal government the Places to Grow policy, which actually was met with a great deal of negative response by many municipalities, including the town of Halton Hills and including the county of Wellington, who felt that the initial growth targets the provincial government was forcing on us were too high. And we had to push back, and there were negotiations, and there was finally, I guess, a grudging acceptance of the numbers that were being pushed on us by the province. The concern, of course, is how are we going to pay for the infrastructure that's required for these tens of thousands of additional people who are going to be moving in our communities, unless this whole system of the Places to Grow policy is reviewed. I think that we need to take a look at it again. I think that by 2041, of course, our communities are going to be much larger if this goes through as it is, but we have to plan for it responsibly and predictably.
Next question was a little shorter, so hopefully a little easier. The first ones were rather long. Do you support payments to farmers for environmental services that are farming within the Greenbelt? And we will start with John.
Repeat that again. I'm having a little difficulty hearing you.
Okay. Do you support payments to farmers for environmental services that are farming within the Greenbelt? So the environmental services the farmers provide.
I'm going to pass on this one. I'm just not sure what the intent of the question is.
Okay, thank you. Dave?
Yeah, I think environmental services and externalities are something that really has to be introduced into the budget and into evaluation of rural land. As an example, and this goes back to, I was at the American Association of Sciences conference in 1996 it was, and Paul Ehrlich brought out his book on natural services. The city of New York, by saving a watershed above them, has saved, and I'm sorry, I don't have the exact number, but billions of dollars from water treatment in preserving a rural landscape where there is farming, but water is good. The Greenbelt is the same sort of concept, and we have to do that. And you have to be paid and get some return for that, but it is an essential service for this planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Ted?
Well, I think that our farm community has done a great deal to protect and improve our environment, and I think that needs to be acknowledged at the outset. I thought of initially the Grand River Conservation Authority's Rural Water Quality Program that has worked with many farmers in our communities in Waterloo and Wellington over the years to improve the environment in those local communities. I also think that the environmental farm plans that many farmers have adopted voluntarily are good. But I also think that if society is expecting to push the farm community to do more in terms of environmental protection, I think the government should be behind that with funding assistance to support those projects.
Thank you. Diane?
I would agree with that last point that Ted said, that there needs to be a great deal more of funding assistance if there's going to be an expectation to provide environmental services. As far as answering the question itself, though, of whether I support payments for environmental services to farmers farming within the Greenbelt, I do not know what the NDP's policy is on that specific question.
Thank you. This next question is addressed to Mr. Hurst and Mr. Valentine, but we have given the option for all of you to answer, so we will do that. and we will start with Dave to answer this question. Bill 148 raised the minimum wage by 22% in about 6 months, with about 6 months notice. This has been devastating to small businesses. We were generally not opposed to the increase in the minimum wage, but we were given an unrealistic time frame to implement it without major negative impacts to our businesses and our families. Many of us have pondered the need for legislation to protect small business from our government, similar to rent control legislation, something that would limit how much a government can increase a business's cost within a certain time frame. Would you be willing to slow down the next phase of the minimum wage hike to help us adjust? And how would you improve the relationship between government and small business?
As I understand it, the Green Party supports the increase in the minimum wage and the proposed increase in the minimum wage. But what they are suggesting is an increase in the amount for the health care exemption tax for businesses, which I think, and I don't know the exact number, but I think it goes up to 4 million now. And basically, for your employees, you would be getting the health care tax exemption. Thank you.
Ted?
I voted against Bill 148 in the legislature because I believe that it increased the minimum wage too fast and that our small businesses couldn't afford it. But nonetheless, on January 1st, 2018, the minimum wage was increased from $11.60 an hour to $14 an hour. That decision was driven largely by politics. For many workers, the dramatic increase in minimum wage meant layoffs and reduced hours, which we had predicted in advance. I believe we need the minimum wage to be set at a level that is fair for workers, but also affordable for employers and competitive with our competing jurisdictions. It should be reviewed annually after consultation with business and labor, considering the rate of inflation and the increased cost of living. Small business people create the majority of our jobs, and the provincial government should never, ever dismiss their concerns.
Thank you, Ted. Diane?
There's two pieces to that. I would agree that Bill 148 was implemented really quickly and did dramatically affect small businesses. However, the fundamental platform of the NDP is to ensure that people are able to earn a living wage so that they are able to pay for their families and to be able to ensure that they can provide a decent life for their children. The poverty rate in this province is growing, has grown over the last 20 years, over the last two Liberal and Conservative governments. This is absolutely shameful. It's unacceptable. And the NDP does support the $15 minimum wage implementation for next year.
Thank you, Diane. John?
The minimum wage, I think, increase speaks to our values as Liberals. It's about equal opportunity. It's about being paid, properly paid for a day's work. We know that by raising that minimum wage to a level which I know did cause some concern regarding whether it would or how it would affect some businesses. I've talked to many small business owners some who have been affected with it, some who have adapted to it. But at the end of the day, it's a matter that we felt that we have to be protecting our workers and making sure that they are making a living wage, because a fairly large percentage of them are the breadwinners. It's as I said, it's about equal opportunity, and there are. It is good for not only for workers, but it can be good for businesses too.
Thank you, John. Next question. We did receive a couple of questions from the National Farmers Union for the combined Wellington Waterloo. So one of their questions is, why is it that Class 1 farmland on one side of a demarcation line, such as a highway, is deemed not worthy saving, and on the other side of this line, Class 4 or worse land is being preserved? We will start with Ted.
Well, clearly, if that's happening, it's not the right decision. We should be preserving our best farmland. We should be making an effort to do that. Provincial policy should support that. And if there's a lesser quality farmland or class 4, as you say, you would think that that would be more likely to be the land that should be developed.
Thank you. Diane?
I would have to echo that. If that's what's happening, that doesn't make any sense. I can't explain it because it's not it's not my government's policy. And if that is continuing to happen, then I think you can be assured that because we put people at the center of all the decisions that we're making, that you will be able to talk to me as your MPP to bring those concerns forward into the House to make sure that those questions are answered, because in that particular situation, it seems completely illogical.
Thank you, Diane. John?
And I would actually agree with the last two speakers. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have class 1 farmland developed with class 4 right beside it. There may be a logistical reason for it. I can't think just at this moment what it would be. As Diane said, it would be something that we would want to look into to find out what was the criteria for choosing the area where the class 1 farmland is, and why would we want to take it out of service for food production.
Thank you. Dave?
I'm going to echo what the other three parties have said. The only thing I would say is that I would want to look very carefully at what the class 4 was and see if it had other values with respect to wetlands for this type of system, which are also worth preserving, and they're part of the water treatment system of this planet. The Green Party is very much in favor and on policy of protecting prime farmland. Class 1 farmland is that. I will stop there.
Thank you. Next question. If you are elected, what will your government do to incorporate the actual and real physical properties and food producing capacity of any given parcel of land into your government's food land preservation program? And we will start with Diane.
Wait, can you repeat that one more time, please?
If you are elected, what will your government do to incorporate the actual and real physical properties and food producing capacity of any given parcel of land into your government's food land preservation program?
Okay, so the NDP's policy is to make sure that they are in particular working with young farmers to support them to be able to farm. There's also the intention to create a provincial food and water strategy that's going to focus on local food production and the supply management of that. So the policy would be to help support, to create as much production that you can within the parcels of land that we have.
Thank you. John?
The Liberal government has shown its commitment to farmland preservation with several policies, including the establishment of the Green Belt, the Places to Grow, and particularly the agricultural system policies for land planning, which identifies food production, land use, infrastructure, businesses, and services that are food related, to help municipalities make informed decisions to protect critical farmland and businesses. And Dave, you just reminded me in your last comment, I thought I lived in a swamp. You say I live in a water treatment system. I'm not feeling so good.
Dave?
Okay, I guess one man's cup is half full and the other is half empty. My wife loves wetlands. And, but yes, farmland should be preserved by all means. And could you repeat the question? Because it was really long and I'm a little bit confused by it.
If you're elected, what will your government do to incorporate the actual and real physical properties and food producing capacity of any given parcel of land? So essentially, it's productive value.
other than protecting farmland involves a bunch of things. And I suspect what we would like rather than what we would be intent to organic, but I will stop there.
Thank you. Ted?
Well, I'm going to answer the question this way because I think we all share the view that farmland, the best quality farmland has to be protected. I think for a start, OMAFRA needs to keep a more updated database on the best quality farmland on their website. When I was researching for this meeting tonight, I looked at some of their websites and they're quite out of date. And I think the data has to be up to date so that we can make good decisions. I think we need to review best practices in other jurisdictions. I think we need to support Ontario's Farmland Trust, which is something that's affiliated with the University of Guelph, to ensure that there's direct land protection, policy development, research and education. And I would lastly say that if the best way to preserve farmland is to ensure that farming as an activity is profitable, and if we protect and preserve the farmer, he or she will protect and preserve their own farmland.
Thank you. Next question, we'll let John start. If elected, will you and your party advocate for policies to better protect Ontario's farmland and groundwater from the negative impacts of aggregate pits and quarries?
Absolutely. We of course, are all aware of the situation just south of Rockwood, where the hidden quarry is an issue that's been dragging on for some period of time. And we know the negative effects that quarry is going to have on the Rockwood community, and also with the delivery of aggregate and trucks returning. It's going to have a negative effect on the town of Halton Hills. So it's an issue that I would champion. I have championed, actually. We've had CRC in our council chambers. I've been up to the meetings in Rockwood. As a matter of fact, it's an issue that I think has been identified well, what I've said is if they're going to allow it, then the first place they should deliver the aggregate to is the bypass to around Acton, because Acton is just going to be decimated by all that truck traffic.
Thank you, John. Dave?
Hi. Yes, coming from Bushlands, we're familiar with gravel as well. Ontario is losing farmland at an unsustainable rate of 365 acres per day over the area the size of Toronto every year. We will expand the Greenbelt. We will invest $2 million over 4 years to pay farmers to protect water and store carbon and not have it mined correctly. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted?
Well, I believe and continue to believe that provincial aggregates policies should be balanced. I know that we need stone, sand, and gravel, but we also need to ensure that there is a fair hearing of public and environmental concerns and a dispute settlement mechanism which is impartial and unbiased. And of course, the hidden quarry proposal is currently before the Ontario Municipal Board. There's going to be a hearing that's going to start in just a few days. So it would be inappropriate and quite frankly irresponsible for an MPP to express a position one way or the other as to whether it should go ahead, because that decision needs to be made on an impartial basis based on the facts presented at the Ontario Municipal Board. But I would say this, I have met with representatives of the Concerned Residents Coalition on a number of occasions. I've walked the property, I've written letters, many letters, and raised issues in the legislature with respect to improvements to the process, and I would want to continue to do that. This is a difficult issue, but as Councillor John Hurst mentioned, an issue with respect to the town of Halton Hills as well, and I've advocated on behalf of the town for a long-term truck strategy, working with town officials, seeking the provincial government's support as a funding partner, and I'm not done with that issue yet either. I hope to continue to do that in the future as well.
Thank you, Ted. Diane?
Yes, I would strongly advocate to better protect farmland and water. That is the point of implementing the provincial food and water strategy in our platform. And part of that is to promote healthy access to healthy food and water, and to put the public first, as well as growing towns and farmers to be able to access both that rich farmland and access to drinking water.
Thank you. Next question. I'd like to ask everyone's firm position on the prospects of complete prescription and dental coverage for Ontarians. I'd like to know to what extent each candidate's party will pursue and whether it will economically benefit Ontarians and employers in Ontario. And we will start with Dave.
The Green Party would be in favor of dental care being available to everybody in Ontario, regardless of ability to pay or where you live. A lot of it, particularly with children, if it's applied early, it can prevent significant problems and expenses in older people like me.
Thank you. Ted?
I sat in the House when the most recent Liberal budget was presented, and the budget projected a deficit of, I think, $6.7 billion. We later heard that the Auditor General suggested it was closer to $12 billion. I read on Sunday the MPP platform, and both of these documents suggest that the Liberal Party and the New Democrats are going to move forward with a pharmacare and dental program. My concern is we can't afford these big spending promises at this time. I believe that what these two parties are doing is trying to buy your votes with borrowed money, and I'm concerned about that, obviously. But I would say that our party has acknowledged the need for a dental care program for seniors, and we're proposing to do that. It's a modest proposal with less than $100 million in cost. But I also think that if we're moving in the direction of a pharmacare program, we need to do it on the national level. We need leadership from the federal government, working with all the provinces so that the economies of scale can make it more affordable, and we look to the federal government to provide the leadership.
Thank you, Ted. Diane?
Okay, the NDP's platform is to support complete prescription or pharmacare and dental care for everybody. That creates healthier and happier people, which makes for stronger citizens and better employees. They have access to that regardless of their age or their job status, and that's particularly important to millennials as the gig economy affects their ability to be able to have what many of us in the older generation have experienced as full extended medical coverage in our jobs. The norm in all universal healthcare providing nations is to have pharmacare. We're the outlier. We're the only one that doesn't have it. Most also have dental care. I would disagree with my friend on my right that it doesn't need to be done on a national level. Tommy Tom Douglas, not on a first name basis, implemented it in Saskatchewan first as a model, and then it was taken nationally. So that actually is the norm. And the massive cuts from the Harris government were 6,000 nurses and 28 hospitals.
John?
The Ontario Liberals have led the largest expansion in Medicare in a generation, expanding it first to children and youth under the age of 25, and have planned in 2019 to expand it to seniors as well. We are moving closer to the goal of pharmacare for all people in Ontario. Thanks to our leadership, 4 million young Ontarians and their families are now able to afford the medications that will keep them healthy. And OHIP Plus is giving young people access to more than 4,400 medications that are reimbursed under the Ontario Drug Benefit Program, including medications listed under the Exceptional Access Program, and they're receiving those at no cost. This expansion makes life more affordable for families when they don't have to, are not burdened by the cost of these medications.
Thank you, John. Next question. I believe that the most important issue facing all of us is the effects of man-made climate change. What specific policies will your party put in place to reduce greenhouse gas production? And we'll start with Ted.
For about a year, I've served as our party's critic to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, and I've had many conversations with environmental groups, as well as the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, Dr. Diane Sachs. For many years, I have acknowledged in the legislature that climate change is a fact, that it is happening, and that man-made greenhouse gas emissions are a significant contributing factor. There are a lot of people who ask me about that and challenge me, and I say I'm not a climate scientist, but I read what they're saying. So I believe we have to be part of the solution, and Ontario has to do its part. And our party has taken the position, though, that a carbon tax at this time is unaffordable for the average family. We can't afford it at this time, and we're proposing to repeal the cap and trade program, and actually to challenge the federal government's carbon tax that they're threatening to impose on all the provinces. But I do believe that through research, innovation, and technology, we can find ways to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And I think all of us who are concerned about greenhouse gas emissions and climate change need to do more ourselves as individuals.
Diane?
The NDP has a strong platform on climate change and reducing our carbon footprint. One of the ways is to have mass investment in large transit. Also, we will keep the cap and trade system and use that revenue to be invested into eco retrofits. For the PCs to cancel that program would be a loss of $2 billion in revenue. And we would also provide increased funding for the agricultural drainage infrastructure program, which affects farmland in particular due to flooding as a result of climate change.
Thank you. John?
The Liberal government has taken some criticism for their cap and trade program. This is a program that is actually charging polluters, industry that pollute, charging them a tax on the amount of pollution that they are producing. And that money is accumulated and a lot of people, I've been told, that they think it just goes into general revenues and it's just being spent away. It is dedicated to infrastructure opportunities, transit, and any opportunity to reduce the greenhouse or to reduce the emissions that are now being emitted. It's also supporting cycling. It's supporting a program called Green On, which I hope some of you are aware of. It's actually taking some of that money and providing funding for homeowners and businesses to upgrade their homes to make them environmentally better.
Dave?
Our platform commits the Green Party to setting the province on a path to 100% renewable energy. Your Green MPPs will fight for an independent public review of the costs and availability of all energy sources to make the best choices. We will push for low-cost energy solutions that meet our greenhouse gas commitments. And we will target rate reductions for the most vulnerable instead of across-the-board reductions that benefit the wealthy the most.
Thank you. Next question. What is your position on amalgamating small rural municipalities? Yeah, that's not a political question. We'll start with Diane.
I know that when small municipalities were amalgamated the last time, that created a great deal of difficulty. But I don't know what the NDP's policy is on amalgamation.
Thank you. John?
Well, I remember the amalgamations that took place in the past. It was funny that Acton and Georgetown, they used to compete against each other. We used to sneak down to Georgetown, and people used to sneak down to Georgetown and do things to their football field. But amalgamation in that instance has brought the two communities together and bonded us. I do not specifically know what the Liberal policy is. I haven't heard anything about amalgamating the communities, but I would need to see a rationale for that.
Thank you. Dave?
I'm in a similar position that I know that past amalgamations have caused problems. I'm not aware of any on the horizon, and but it would have to be reviewed and assessed on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted?
28 years ago, when I was seeking my first opportunity to serve in the legislature, this was actually the #1 issue in our riding, in the riding of Wellington in 1990, because I believed that the David Peterson government was pushing county restructuring too hard, and they were forcing municipalities to consider shotgun marriages that they didn't want. I opposed it then, and later on, when the Conservative government came in, I pushed for greater local autonomy for local councils to make their own decisions. One of our municipalities in central Wellington, what became Centre Wellington, asked for the appointment of a commissioner to review the county structure, and then the County of Wellington decided to amalgamate several of its municipalities. But my position was always that the local councils should be able to make the final decision and not have it imposed from above. And I wouldn't favor any changes to our current municipal boundaries unless the municipalities themselves bring the proposal to the provincial government.
Thank you. Next question, recognizing that this is a national issue, and in the current climate of current NAFTA talks, we just want to know, and this question did not come from me, do you support supply management? What are your views on supply management? And we will start with John.
Well, as far as the NAFTA negotiations go, our priority is to ensure that we stand up for the people of Ontario, and we want to defend free and fair trade at every opportunity. We know that free and fair trade is good for both economies. We're seeing a little different view from the other side, our major partner below. But good and free trade has created millions of solid, good-paying jobs on both sides of the border. The NAFTA negotiations are at a critical point, and I know our Liberal government has been working hard to ensure that the priorities of Ontario are being heard. Kathleen Wynne has actually traveled to the States to visit with 37 different governors, as well as many senators in Washington, as she has been working proactively to strengthen the relations across the border.
Thank you. Dave?
This is outside my field by far, but from what I understand, supply side management, such as with milk, provides the producer with a stable price base and a credit. And it gives him something when he retires. There's a value to the milk quota and can sell the farm. And this is being contested by NAFTA and probably the World Trade Organization. And it all comes back to the first NAFTA, where economic, environmental concerns were removed. The policy became trade, trumps environment and farming. And I don't see that going away, but it would be nice if it would.
Thank you. Ted?
I absolutely support supply management. I always have, I always will. I view it as one of the vital economic interests of our riding in Wellington County and Halton region. There are many farmers that rely on it. It has a very positive, beneficial to our overall economy, beneficial aspect. And in terms of the NAFTA negotiations, yes, it's federal, but the provincial governments need to be consulted as the negotiations continue. And I would not favor trading off supply management for anything with the NAFTA negotiations.
Thank you. Diane?
Well, our Niagara and Southwestern platform was just released on Tuesday, and it clearly states that the NDP support and will defend supply management.
Thank you. If your leader makes decisions or acts in a way that would damage rural communities, what will you do? We'll start with Dave.
I would probably go against my leader. That's one of the things that the Green Party allows. We do not have when we elect MPPs into the legislature,
Thank you. Ted?
Over the time that I've been privileged to serve in the legislature, I have stood up at caucus many, many times, too many times to count, to stand up for our constituents in our riding, especially our vital interests. And I have stood toe-to-toe with party leaders who didn't necessarily appreciate what I was saying. But not everybody gets to see that because it's usually behind closed doors at a caucus meeting. It's not just me. I think in every party there are strong-willed members who fight vocally and vigorously for their constituents' interests and are prepared to stand up to their leaders. There's a perception and a belief that the leaders are the bosses and that we as caucus members have to work for the leaders. That's not true. I don't see the leader of my party as my boss. I see the people of Wellington, Halton Hills, collectively, the 120,000 people who live in our riding, collectively are my boss. They're the people I report to.
Thank you. Diane?
Lived experiences are, and then you should clearly articulate and stand up for what is right. I was proudly the recipient of a Provincial Human Rights Award for my work in this area in my profession. So would I stand up to my leader if I disagreed with what was going on? Absolutely.
Thank you. John?
I've been on Halton Hills Council for 14 years, and on several occasions, I certainly have had to passionately strive to make my point known, and in that type of atmosphere, the leaders tend to listen. We have all have strong voices around the council table, and I would bring that to a Liberal government. I wouldn't call it standing up to my leader. I would call it having maybe a robust conversation might be the better way of describing it. I had the opportunity of meeting Kathleen Wynne a couple of days ago at an event in Guelph. I've met her previously, but I've never had a chance to speak to her one-on-one, and had that opportunity to do so. And from what I've known and what I've seen, I think Kathleen Wynne is a leader who would listen to my concerns and take them into consideration.
Thank you, John.
Which Ted may have a problem with his leader.
Dave? Oh, sorry, you started. Claws are coming out, sorry. So the next question, we will have Ted start. So what can government do better to manage its activities so as to ensure more attention is given to long-term as opposed to short-term concerns?
Well, it starts with leadership. Many politicians are accused of not looking beyond the next electoral cycle, not looking beyond the next election, only caring about their own re-election prospects. Clearly, if we're going to do our job as leaders, as elected leaders, we have to be looking past the next election. We have to be looking past the next 5 years, 10 years, and even to the next generation. And I think that's our obligation as community leaders who are elected to serve the people. It starts with an attitude. It starts with, I think, an understanding of what our real responsibilities are, and certainly that's what I try to do every day in the legislature.
Thank you. Diane?
I think that it's important always to put people at the center of the decisions that are made at the governing tables. And that ensures that we have to look at and invest in the future. The pharmacare program that the NDP is proposing, the dental care for all that the NDP is proposing, treating seniors with dignity, expanding 2,000 hospital beds immediately. Those are all long-term investments. And it's important to put people over profits, and to be able to make a soundbite that you put a few dollars in somebody's pocketbook, because those pocketbook cuts only work for the people that have the most and they have choices. The vast majority of people, those small cuts that might play well for a soundbite don't actually help many people. So a tax cut for someone making minimum wage actually gets them about $150, which couldn't even get one child's teeth cleaned. It's important to invest in the long term if we're going to have a healthy society.
Thank you, Diane. John?
I think long-term planning is something that the Liberal government has been very good at. I think an example is the Places to Grow policies that the Liberal government has used to identify where population numbers should be allocated within different areas of the province, especially when you think when we're planning, when we want to plan ahead. The province has already planned for up to the period of 2031 and is now talking the following 10 years of planning for 2041. So what this does is gives everybody in the municipalities and the regions the opportunity to consider what kind of services have to be provided to supply those people. A second opportunity, or second example would be hospital planning. When I started on the board of Halton Healthcare, Oak Hill Hospital had already been a couple of years in the planning.
Thank you, John.
And it concluded just a year and a half ago.
Dave?
Yes, as a generation and as a society, we are very short on long-term planning. And in this, I think we can learn from the First Nations, who looked ahead 7 generations and behind 7 generations. That is the kind of perspective that the Green Party seeks to foster. If you go to the planet section of our platform, I think I'll read 2 headings. Getting the basics right, protect air, water, and farming. Set Ontario on a pathway to 100% renewable energy. These are long-term plans, but we need it now for this plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moderator, how many more questions are there?
About 4.
My goodness.
Why do you ask?
Well, I'm not sure I think they're making much progress politically, but I may depart, so.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Next question in this writing, a concern by many residents is the amount of water being extracted for the purpose of bottling. What is your party's position on this issue? And we'll have Diane start first.
The NPP's position is to implement a provincial water strategy to ensure that water usage is to the priority of the citizens, to the small growing towns, as well as the farmers. I was proud to sign the Wellington Water Watchers and the Save Our Water Pledge just last week at a Save Our Water information meeting in the town of Elora that commits to and supports to end the corporate water plastic bottling within 10 years and to ensure that we are taking care of the water for the citizens.
Thank you. John?
When the issue came to a head in Fergus, Elora, when the well that was originally identified and was probably wanted and needed by the municipality was bought by a company, the Liberal government realized the seriousness of the situation and immediately put on a 2-year moratorium for any new permits for water taking. That moratorium continues till January 2019. Interestingly, I mentioned to you, I met Kathleen Wynne a couple of days ago in Guelph. As they were waiting for her to arrive, there were a group of people who were standing at the driveway with Save Our Water signs, probably from the different groups of people who are concerned about the water taking. And
thank you, John. Dave?
The Green Party is on record as prioritizing public and drinking water for communities and people. However, when you talk about water, you have to look just not at what's going into bottling, but at the whole water budget. Cities take water, gravel pits take water. There's a proposed glass plant in Centre Valterramosa that will draw water at about 3/4 with Nestle pumps from Aberfoyle. that most of that will be evaporated. That's a consumptive use. All of these have to be undertaken, and I work on the Source Protection Committee, and I know Kyle, the hydrologist, and basically you have to look at the whole picture, all of the sources and all the takings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted.
I have met with the representatives of Save Our Water on a number of occasions, in fact twice in the last 2 weeks. And I'm certainly open to continuing discussions with them. And I think we all agree that we need to protect and preserve our groundwater for future generations. I believe we need a science-based review of all permit to take water applications to guarantee that our aquifers will not be depleted and neighboring wells will not be impacted. Future growth plans and cumulative impacts along watersheds should both be considered by the Ministry of the Environment. I believe we need to do much more to recycle all beverage containers, and I'm suggesting that the government should review the idea of a deposit return system for plastic water bottles.
Thank you. Next question, how will your party enable the next generation to enter agriculture? And we will start with John.
That's a good question. I can't say that I know what the party line is, but I can tell you what my feelings are. I think that obviously farms do pass from generation to generation in a lot of cases, especially when farming families share the passion of what farming is all about with their children. I can remember as I was courting my future wife some many years ago, she lived on a farm, and I spent quite a bit of my time out there actually, and learned a little bit about farming practices and the fact that you shouldn't stand too close to your future father-in-law when he's shoveling manure, but that's beside the point. I just think that there should be opportunities for children of farmers and people who are interested in it to pursue the education that would allow them to enter into the farming practices that
Thank you, John.
are present today.
Dave?
I understand that the farming community is aging, that the average age of farmers in our riding is around 60. I don't know how to bring youth in properly. I don't have a dogma. What I think we have to do is really think about it and talk about it in a big way, because it is a looming crisis. I don't have the answer now. I hope you people do, and we can work it out together. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted?
I read in the latest issue of the Real Dirt on Farming that the average age of farmers in Canada today is 55. And I'm 55, so I thought, oh my gosh, that's old. And we've got to do something about it. But the good news is the number of farmers, young farmers under the age of 35 has recently increased. We've also heard from the University of Guelph that there are 4 jobs available for every agriculture graduate coming out of the University of Guelph. 4 jobs available for every graduate. We've got to get that message out to our young people through our schools and through the other means of reaching out to them through social media. There are exciting career opportunities in agriculture and agri-food, and they're good paying jobs that will sustain a generation or generations of people all around the world. We've got to get that message out and encourage young people to consider careers in agriculture.
Thank you. Diane?
Well, there's a couple of ways that the MPP would support trying to help in that area. One of the ways is to invest in post-secondary funding to reduce the stranglehold of debt that young people are coming out of school with, which makes it very difficult to try and then start up a farming business. The average university student carries $27,000 worth of debt when they graduate. The NDP, in their platform, states that they're going to work collaboratively with farming groups, and that will help millennial farmers to be able to get their foot into the door. The reality is that the agricultural research funds have been cut by more than 50% since 2014, which shuts off an entire area of agricultural work and a pathway into that. I understand clearly the concerns about being able to encourage young farmers. I worked on my uncle's farm in Wellington Township up north of Shelburne for many years, and neither of his sons took over his beef farm because it was not profitable enough. I think the National Farmers Union's quote, lack of fair compensation over decades has resulted in farmland being surrendered en masse to investment funds, pension funds, and speculative landowners. This isn't good for anybody, and the NDP would work
Thank
with
you,
farmers
Diane.
to try to solve that.
Next question. All of your parties have promised various significant tax cuts or spending increases in their platforms. How does your party propose to deal with the billions of interest to service the Ontario public debt? And we'll start with Dave.
It's a complex question, but one of the proposals that the Green Party is bringing forth that the other parties don't seem to, is that if we start costing our natural resources at something reasonable, right now we're the lowest, and if we even brought them up to Saskatchewan rates for gravel and mining, that we could bring in $4 billion to this province. There's a revenue side to the budget, as well as the deficit side. Other things you can do are stop funding high-cost nuclear power and import low-cost power from Quebec, which brings, I think, another $4 billion in savings to the province. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted.
Yeah, throughout my years in the legislature, I've been drawing attention to the need for fiscal responsibility in government, and that means government should live within their means during good years. In fact, in good years, we should be paying down the debt. When the Liberals took office in 2003, the debt was $139 billion. It's now at least $308 billion. It's more than double. This year, they're running a deficit, according to the Auditor General, of almost $12 billion. They're also spending about $12 billion a year on interest. That's $1 billion a month to make interest payments on the outstanding provincial debt. That's money that could be going to frontline health care, to education, to environmental protection, or any number of uses, but it's not. It's going to pay off debt. We need a long-term debt repayment plan. That's again something that I pushed for in the legislature on a number of occasions in the past. My most recent proposal suggested that a new line item should be created in the budget to pay down 2.5% of the government's operating expenses on an annual basis as a debt repayment, and over time reduce the debt burden for our next generation.
Thank you, Ted. Diane?
So one of the ways to ensure that we can service the debt is to bring hydro back into public hands. The Auditor General has provided us with a window to do so, and within 10 years we would have billions of dollars in revenue to both service the debt and fund the much needed social programs that we have. In addition, another revenue stream would be a 1% tax on those making the very most, over $300,000 a year, and a 1.5% tax on the wealthiest corporations. That's not the small businesses. That is corporations that are clearing more than $4 million in profits a year. These are not taxes on the middle class. These are not taxes on the average working people. They're taxes on the very wealthiest. That corporate tax is not an outrageous ask for the biggest corporations, because we already have the lowest corporate tax rate in the country. We have a lower corporate tax rate than the United States and every single country in Europe. This is a small ask to service the debt and also to pay for the much needed programs that we deserve.
Thank you, Diane. John?
Well, the NDP want to buy back more than $4 billion worth of Hydro One shares, and that would not take 1 cent off your electricity bill. It would also mean that they have to stop the infrastructure investments that are being made by the money that was accumulated from that sale. The province continues to be the largest shareholder of Hydro One. It's been suggested that an entity like Hydro One in private hands, where you're beholden to shareholders, you're much more likely to see development in savings, and because the Hydro One right now is really not well run. It is inefficient, and all that would change when you're answering to shareholders. So I think that the Ontario government is using the money that it's made to fund the critical infrastructure repairs and replacements that are needed today.
Thank you, John.
When the interest rates are low.
Our last question, And this is in reference to landowners that have properties within the source water protection area. Why are all the costs, including property devaluation, restricted land use, and system upgrades, borne by the landowner for source water protection? And we'll start with Ted.
I was just speaking with one of the people who was here as he came in today, and his land has been affected by this source water protection. And he recommended to me that there should be at least some recognition of the new encumbrance that has been placed on his property by this provincial government policy. And I would agree. One simple way would be to reduce property taxes to reflect that. But there might be other ways to show some recognition of this new restriction that's put on a landowner's property. And again, if society is expecting this policy to benefit all of society, surely the landowner that's most directly affected by it should be able to benefit in some meaningful way.
Thank you. Diane?
It would seem that there needs to be balance in an approach for a landowner needing to bear an additional cost. As your MPP, the idea of listening and working in consultation with you and bringing those concerns to the table, to whichever government is at hand, is what my role would be. So I would welcome to meet with you to understand what that problem is, to investigate it further, and then to be able to advocate on your behalf, or to be able to explain whatever the policy happens to be, and then see if we can work through it. Thanks.
Thank you. John?
Source protection regions have been provided funding for technical studies to increase their understanding of water sources, both ground and surface, that provide local drinking water. Particularly in the area around Halton Hills, source water protection strategies were identified and funded for local farmers to improve their water quality and to eliminate the sources of concern. You can be assured that there will be no cuts to any water protection activities with the Liberal government, particularly given that when we look back to what happened to the Walkerton tragedy, we would never want to go through that again. Source water protection is important, and it's something that this Liberal government believes in.
Thank you. Dave?
I represent the Bushlers Township for the Hamilton-Halton Source Water Protection Committee. And there are agriculture representatives on it, and I've talked to them. And yes, there are some costs, but I understand that a lot of the costs of manure storage and all this are subsidized or helped by the province. And going back to John's comment on Walkerton, that's why we have a source protection committee, or a source policy of water policy. And I don't want to go back on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Each of the candidates will have an opportunity to give a 2-minute closing statement. We will go in the opposite order of the opening statements. So we will go Dave, Diane, John, and then Ted. So Dave, if you'd like to start.
Thank you. First, I apologize for going to 5757 is line Rockwood rather than 5757 Hermosa. I read the thing and I copied it down and I don't know what happened. I apologize for extending your stay here. Now I want to thank Janet and the Wellington and Halton Federation of Agriculture for organizing this meeting, and the other candidates and you, the audience, for putting up with me. And for coming to this meeting and giving me a chance to speak with you tonight and share the green vision of Ontario and offer you the choice to vote outside of the three-ring political circuit. As your MPP, I will work hard to make Wellington, Halton Hills, and Ontario a better place for us all. Vote for what you hope, rather than against that which you fear. Vote green. Thank you.
Diane?
I'd like to start by thanking the Wellington and Halton Federations of Agriculture and the Central Wellington Chamber of Commerce for inviting me here tonight. It was an honor to sign the Producing Prosperity Pledge. And I would also like to state that there's an impressive array of community service that's been done by the people that are sitting on the stage. And while we may disagree in some cases quite fundamentally about how to move forward, there's no doubt that we're all deeply committed to our communities. Well, I've spent the better part of the debate focused on fiscally responsible policies and a fully costed plan for change. I'd like to add in what I've been doing for the past 28 years since I served at the Interparliamentary and Public Relations branch at Queen's Park. Yes, Ted and I both started there at the beginning of our careers. Over those past decades, I've worked in education, serving as a head of department and facilitating professional development and training at all levels. I've been a leader in my union, sitting on local and provincial committees. I've completed my master's degree, written for CBC, TV Ontario, and various education publishers, and I now sit on the 8th Governing Council for the Ontario College of Teachers, which is the provincial regulatory and licensing body, which is set up to serve the public interest. And as we think about the public interest, it's important to remember this is the first election where the millennials will outnumber the baby boomers. The millennials are coming, and they want change. They want change from crippling post-secondary debt, sky-high property costs, and a lack of security from a good-paying job. The NDP brings a fully costed plan for change to build both a robust economy and a welcoming society that puts people, not profits, at the heart of every decision. I'm committed to inspire the reimagining of this riding in our province, where we can succeed, our aging parents can be treated with dignity, and our children can thrive. A vote for me will reflect all of our ambitions for a more profitable, more equitable, and a brighter future for everyone. It's time for a change for the better. Thank you.
John?
As I have said, Ontario's agri-food sector is an economic powerhouse that generates more than $37 billion to our economy and supports over 800,000 jobs. Liberal policies have supported agriculture along with other economic drivers, and our province today is prosperous. Remember, we lead the G7 in economic growth, and unemployment is at its lowest in 20 years. While our focus tonight is on agriculture, I also want to remind people of other areas where Liberals have improved people's lives in Wellington, Halton Hills. Better health care and shorter wait times through huge investment in the Georgetown and Groves Memorial Hospitals. Liberals have improved our children's access to education from their very early years to their 20s. Liberals have invested in mental health services, which close to 1 in 4 of us may need at some point in our lives. Liberals have taken climate change seriously and committed to helping to bring our planet back from the brink of a disaster that our children may not be able to cope with. Liberals have committed to major investments in transportation to shorten travel time while minimizing the environmental impact of travel. The Liberal government has helped people in a lot of ways. The majority of us are much better off than we were when the previous Conservative government slashed hospital and school budgets and downloaded provincial responsibilities, such as major roads, to the municipal property tax base. And voters should remember too, that in this riding, a vote for the NDP or the Greens will effectively help the Doug Ford Conservatives. A vote for John Hurst as your Liberal candidate will ensure that Ontario's stability, environmental and economic success, particularly in agriculture, will continue and people will thrive. So I respectfully request your support on June the 7th. Thank you all for being here tonight.
On Thursday, June 7th, just 21 days from today, we in Wellington, Halton Hills will go to the polls to elect a member of provincial parliament to represent all of us in the Ontario legislature. Your MPP is directly accountable to you. That is how our parliamentary system works. You, the people of our riding, deserve an MPP who clearly holds beliefs and values which are representative of the residents of Wellington, Halton Hills, has the demonstrated ability to articulate the views of our people, and while being steadfast in principle, be able to persuade others that our preferred course of action is the right one, and has the energy, dedication, and perseverance to work hard day after day, year after year, on behalf of you, your family, and all of our communities. Who has the courage to speak up and defend the vital interests of Wellington Halton Hills, has shown honesty and integrity, and be someone you can trust, and can inspire the respect and confidence of others at Queen's Park, including those in the other parties. Who serves the whole riding equally without favoritism or consideration as to how people or communities voted in the last election. Knows our vast and diverse riding, as well as how Queen's Park works, and be able to put that knowledge to work for all of us. And is confident because of experience and preparation, but is humble and shows humility when proven wrong. Finally, our MPP must be someone who listens and cares, who studies the issues and weighs the facts, and then seeks to act in the public interest, the interest of us all. For almost 28 years, I have given my commitment, my strength, my heart, indeed my all, to live up to that ideal. I would appreciate your support on June the 7th. Thank you very, very much.
Sorry, Ted, I was giving the wave that the 2 minutes were up, and I was wrong. So, thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
My apologies, I blew you up too soon.
That's one small step for acting, one giant leap up for acting kind.
Thank you.